Hello there. I'm Case. This is Tucker. Say hey. And I'm here to talk about fundamentally what I think is one of the hardest unknowns in relationships that I can possibly think of. Myself, I grew up obsessed with the idea of relationships. I thought that a lot of my value and worth growing up was going to be dependent on what I could bring to the table in a relationship. Ultimately, with the excited possibility of being, one of the best husbands on the planet was essentially where my mind went. And I don't know where this obsession began. It doesn't really matter. But I know that a lot of social media and a lot of the movies that I took in, a lot of the rom-coms I loved, played a role in my obsession. And within that, they also played quite a lot of roles in my life for deceiving me into, I guess, a big expectation for what relationships would look like one day. And then as it turned out, they wouldn't look like that. And so to jump right in, when I was about to get married, I did find somebody in my life that I absolutely loved and wanted to spend the rest of my life with. And I had people around me that would give me the general speech that you get when you're in that stage of life where it's like, they're very excited for you and they're hopeful for you, can't wait to see the blessings that are gonna come out of your marriage. However, marriage is hard, remember that. Oh yeah, marriage is hard, remember that. Like, this was like a reoccurring thing that I would hear from people. And at the time, not yet being married, but getting a very clear idea of what you thought it was gonna be like, yeah, I mean, of course marriage is gonna be hard. You have to share your life with another human being who isn't you, who's gonna feel different and approach things different, and that's not gonna make it easy for you to live the lifestyle you've had up to that point, doing and thinking and kind of being free in a sense, in your own way. But as it turns out, once I got married and got my feet wet in that relationship and began to discover the patterns and the differences between us, and really what ended up making it so difficult, as a plane flies over right now, perfect timing. What ends up making it so difficult is the fact that I am what makes marriage hard. It's an individual basis thing. Now, don't get me wrong, being with another person who isn't you has its technical challenges, right? The silly analogy people mostly use is leaving the toilet seat up or leaving the toilet seat down. Like, that's ridiculous. But yes, we have different approaches on how we handle bills. We have different approaches on how we handle cleaning up the house, or even cleaning up the house at all. We have different approaches as to how we prioritize work versus our relationships, or prioritize health versus our work. Any number of things that we find different in the world can be conflicts between us. But for the most part, they're things that we can work ourselves through. What's even more difficult that I did not expect until after I got married was the reality that I am absolutely what makes marriage so hard. It's the baggage and the history that I carry with me, being a flawed human being, an imperfect human being, that I bring that into my own relationship, having not fully worked on it, and essentially dumped that baggage into the relationship with my spouse. And now it's not only mine to deal with, it's ours to deal with. And that can be a very frustrating reality for, I think, a lot of couples when they first get married. And I have found, at least recently, that most of the couples that I know that are around our age and got married around the time my wife and I did, they're having a really, really hard time even considering staying together with each other. And a lot of it has to do with this exact principle. Either one, or most often both of the two people in the relationship, have a lot of baggage that they've carried with them throughout their life, whether it's trauma or previous pain from other relationships, or like situations that were never fully resolved amongst family, friends, or even past relationships with other people that they've buried underneath them, or at least to some degree believed that they had dealt with, but hadn't really sorted out in themselves, hadn't gotten to that point where they've come to a healthy conclusion with it and come out the other end a better person with less baggage, but rather they've become a person who's been carrying it the whole time and just kind of avoiding that it's there, or pretending it's not gonna come up or flare itself. And quite frankly, from my own experience, I can attest that the main reason I think this happens is because there's a sense that the person you're getting yourself involved with to become your partner or your spouse, getting involved with them in general is probably going to solve those things. At least in your brain, that's how it feels. So for example, I am not a mind reader, and I know that. But sometimes it's difficult for me to recognize that my spouse is also not a mind reader. And this is something that caused conflicts in previous relationships I had too, where I had an expectation that I didn't verbalize, or I thought I was being clear in saying, this is what I would like to do, or this is what I need from you emotionally. And I wasn't really getting that across clearly, but I expected my significant other to understand that or be able to interpret it anyway. And obviously they wouldn't. And as a result, I became more bitter and more frustrated and more, closed off, and began to find myself in these situations where I would get angry at them for things that they weren't really doing in reality, but they were just missing the expectations that I had set for our relationship, or I had set for them in some capacity, but I was never making clear. Now, when I met the person that I did marry, my wife now, I loved her so much and was so in love with the process and so in love with being in love with her and so excited about our future that most of these expectations were skyrocketing, but they weren't a big deal at the time because we were taking one step at a time, and then we got engaged, and then it was planning the wedding, and everything was so new and fresh and exciting that you kind of bypass that those expectations still exist. And you also find yourself in really easy situations of just not talking about them. I mean, why would you have those serious expectation conversations with someone before they show themselves in the light? If you don't know that's happening on a subconscious level, then you wouldn't be aware of them enough to actually do something about them beforehand. So naturally, some time has to pass and some hard lessons have to be learned before you're able to expose it and go, oh, I didn't realize I was doing this, right? And see, I think that's the challenge. And I can tell you from my own experience that it took a long time for me to admit that my expectations of the relationship from baggage that I had carried and never dealt with from previous relationships were exposing themselves in my marriage and causing conflict between me and my spouse. I had to admit that first. Come to grips with that I was bringing that into the relationship. It wasn't her fault that I had expectations she wasn't meeting. It was my fault that I had expectations I wasn't getting clear with, or even questioning if they were good expectations or ones that she should feel responsible for. And so having to swallow that pill to begin with was challenge number one. And then challenge number two is figuring out kind of a two-sided coin. One side of that coin is, how do I manage my part in this? To be honest, your being involved with another person in a relationship is difficult by just the sheer fact that they're another human being. And so if you have expectations that you don't feel like are getting met in the relationship, you have to filter them first and make sure that they're not way over the top to a degree that would be unfair for your spouse. And that's hard enough as it is, but then second, the other half of that coin is being able to communicate together and come to some sort of resolution. Because you're also a human being who has feelings, and that's valid. It's just that sometimes those feelings don't need to be validated in order for resolution to exist. And at least from what I've observed and watched in couples around me, that gets blown out of the water so many times. Like, there's an expectation that exists. Once it finally becomes crystal clear that that's a part of the relationship and it's out in the open, then part B is most couples still press into it. Okay, well, now that you know it's clear that I want this from you and you're still not doing it for me, you must hate me. This relationship needs to end. I can't believe I got involved with you to begin with. And then it just steadily, or even sometimes quickly, plummets. But the reality is, like, the two of you need to recognize and respect that you're different people. And so my expectations for how I want this relationship to go are probably very different from yours. I can almost guarantee they're different from yours. And so getting involved with one another means compromise, but it's compromise for the good of the relationship itself, which, as you get involved with other people, or if you're married already, we have to come to an understanding that the marriage is its own little entity. It's something that you both have stepped into and decided to create, all right? One of my favorite analogies of this is essentially a garden. You two have found some ground that is untampered with, and together you've decided to till it and turn it into a bunch of dirt, and you've planted a bunch of seeds. And those seeds are yours and theirs. It's shared. Now, you can't expect them to do all the work so that you can reap the benefit from the garden, because that wouldn't be fair. And vice versa, you can't do all the tilling and expect them to reap the benefit without putting any work in. That would also be unfair. You're gonna go through seasons of life where you're gonna alternate, and sometimes one of you is probably gonna take more of the attention to the garden than the other for any unknown situations. But it should always come back full circle to a point where you both are putting in effort to make that garden the best thing it can, so that everything that comes out of that nourishment feeds you both, takes care of you both, and supports you both. And anytime one of you begins to neglect it, or both of you begins to neglect it, like, that's when things don't bloom. That's when the garden needs to get started over or start fresh. That's when things fall apart. And in the real analogy, if you're producing food through this garden, you don't eat unless you're putting the work into this thing. So it's important for both of you to respect that and treat it as something that you're supposed to share. Now, that comes with an array of communication that needs to happen too, which is a different subject we can talk about for a different time. But ultimately, in summary, what I wanted to share in this video is that for anybody who is on the brink of getting married, not quite there yet, or for anybody who's in their relationship now and can't figure out what might have gone wrong up to this point, and you believe that maybe there's a way out of it, but I don't know what that way is, I recommend two things. Number one, look inward first. You've got to self-diagnose and get deep enough in an unfearful sense that you might be the problem. It might be your expectation. It might be your lack of communication on your expectation. And it might be the fact that you just think they're supposed to solve it for you, and that all the problems you had before your relationship are gonna fade away because you found your one person, your soulmate. That's not how it works. You have got to put effort in on your end to work on being a whole person, so you're not a burden to that other person, and vice versa. They need to put the work in too. Now, part B of this, the other half of this, is learning how to effectively communicate it with the other person without pointing the finger or talking at them. Again, back to that garden analogy, the goal is for the garden to flourish. That is something you both share. So you both have to approach that from the desire of not tearing it out of the ground and getting lost, but actually, what can I do to invite you back in to helping me work on this for our mutual benefit? That has got to be the goal, because if it isn't, you've already lost track and we need to start on a different step. But either way, I hope that whatever stage you're in your relationship is, that you can take into consideration what you might need to work on yourself, and then how to effectively communicate that with your spouse for the good and the health of the relationship that you're in. If you got in your relationship unhopeful that it was gonna last a long time, you have other problems. Because as far as I'm aware, nobody gets seriously involved with another person unless a part of them hopes that maybe this will last the rest of my life, or as long as possible. But that cannot happen without work, and that work has to come from both of you. And most of the time, that work ends because one or both of you is not communicating with the other effectively, or one of or both of you are refusing to work on yourselves. So take some time, reflect on yourself, then learn how to effectively communicate that with that other person. And maybe I can help you with some of those tips and tricks as time goes on. They're really not tricks. It's experience. You're gonna have to get dirty in that garden. You're gonna have to make mistakes. You're gonna have to step on each other's toes to learn how not to step on each other's toes, all right? So get in there, get messy, make things work. It is worth it. I promise you from the bottom of my heart, it's worth it. I want you to have the healthiest relationships you possibly can. It is so important to me that you get to share in the delight and the experience of what a true healthy relationship should look like. Hey, buddy. So if anything I can do to help that, I will, all right? I wanna make more of this content. So if you have any questions or interests at all, I do have a lot of experience in this way, in the sense that I've had some very bad relationships that I've handled very poorly and learned big lessons from. And I've had a very successful relationship now for the last 5.5 to 6 years, and we're going on strong. And I would love to help you out, because I know a lot of couples that don't even make it that long, okay? Ask questions below if you're interested, and if you want more of this content, subscribe, and I'll start making more. Say bye. Say bye.